Welcome back to the channel, guys. As part of the series where I look at famous or well-known investors, and I'd like to look back at one of my favorites, which is Charlie Munger, and just some of the mental modals and sort of his value investing methodologies. So, who was Charlie Munger? So, Charlie was the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett's closest partner for over 40 years. Munger was renowned for his multidisciplinary approach to life, advocating that investors build a lattice work of mental models from physics, biology, and psychology to understand the world. His sharp wit and wisdom transformed him into a cultural figure in the investing world. And I think it's really funny when you watch back some of the Berkshire Hathaway, they do the annual kind of meeting, shareholder meeting, and I would recommend you, if you can grab them online or on YouTube on other channels, it's quite a fun watch to hear some of his wisdom. The first one is around investing. The big money is not in the buying and the selling, but in the waiting. And I think this is a key lesson that just released a video around how most retail investors, they get shaky when the markets shake. And I think this is the key point, that if you bought a solidly sound investment, it's the waiting game, and people are not very good at just sitting on their hands doing nothing. In terms of a life lesson, he spent each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up. And I think this is quite key. I think learning along the way is key, not only investing, but in life in general. And I think we choose not to do this because we find it difficult in life. And I fall foul of this all the time. And I'm always constantly trying to learn and gain more knowledge and experience, particularly in the investing space as well. Back to an investing quote. It's remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have forgotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. And this is classic Charlie Munger humor here in terms of how people invest. And so, again, I think a lot of his quotes still apply today, which is what I find quite fascinating, that he had just so much insight from just investing in the markets for such a long time. Life quote again: the best thing a human being can do is to help another human being know more. And this is fundamentally core to me for this channel, is that I've learned a lot over the 20 years I've been investing in the markets. And I want to share some of the mistakes, some of the things that are out there, so the education is out there. I feel like we're let down by the system a little bit, certainly in my country, in the UK, where we don't really get taught about saving. We don't really get taught about investing properly in schools. And I think more of it needs to get out there. And it's my way of giving back to the community around it, educating people, highlighting things like this, other investors, how they've approached things. And there'll probably be no right or wrong answers. It's more about education rather than financial advice. And I think that's the key direction. I don't want you to tell you to go and buy a particular investment or stock or whatever the next hype thing is. It's more about understanding why that stock exists in your portfolio, what value is it providing back to the portfolio, what was your understanding when you bought it, what's your understanding today, and what's the understanding for the future. And that's key. Number 5 is a lot of people with high IQs are terrible investors because they've got terrible temperaments. I find this quite amusing, to be honest. Another Charlie Munger type humor in this. I don't know how true this is. Obviously, it's never really been measured, but I'm sure he's probably met a lot of high IQ people in his lifetime and must have a good understanding of the fact that their temperaments are quite poor. Another life lesson: knowing what you don't know is more useful than being brilliant. I think this is a really good quote. There's so much misinformation, there's so much lack of information, and it's a balance. And I think this quote highlights that. Another one for investing: we have 3 baskets for investing: yes, no, and too tough to understand. And I think this is very fundamental to how Charlie and Warren worked within Berkshire Hathaway. Then they've always said there is this pile that we know is stuff that we know is good. We've looked at the numbers, we've validated everything. It's easy to understand and evaluate. Then the ones that are they're not interested in, it's either outside of their terminology was circle of competence and it was too tough to understand. and there were too many speculations around it. And then there was the simple no pile, which is it was the financials didn't make sense. There were a lot of red flags in there, potential lot of regulatory concerns. And they looked at buying opportunities. I think they've done some really good ones over the years. I remember when Bank of America was going through some turmoil, they looked at the books and said there's still a lot of potential here. Same with American Express. So they've been really smart over the years with their investments and how they've invested. Another life quote, he said, "In my whole life, I've known no wise people over a broad subject matter area who didn't read all the time. None, zero." So I think what he's basically aiming at here is that knowledge is power to a degree. And if you spend the time and effort trying to genuinely understand something, you stand a far greater chance of doing well. And this goes back to understanding your investments as well, understanding why you're doing those investments, what value is it providing to your portfolio, doing the research. And I can understand why value investors do so well over the long term. I put Warren and Charlie in the value investing bucket. Yes, they did other things. They bought preferreds, they did dividend investing, as of course. Coca-Cola is one of their biggest investments. So I do understand that, but I think this is something that people, certainly from an education standpoint, really struggle with. And I don't blame them. I blame the system a little bit for letting them down from that standpoint. Another investing quote, "Simplicity improves performance because it helps us better understand what we're doing." And I think this is the key. We always try and, if I was to look at this from an investing lens, we always try and overcomplicate our investments. Sometimes it's really hard to understand what diversification means. And I was looking at my own portfolio the other day and I was thinking, am I over diversified or am I over concentrated? How much overlap do each of my positions actually have? And when you buy these ETFs and these funds, it's really hard to actually start to think about, okay, I've got a lot of a particular stock because of the way it weights the particular fund. And then you start to wonder, am I really that diversified or am I actually quite concentrated? Sometimes just having one world tracker, for example, probably covers the S&P already. If you then got the S&P on top of that, are you really diversifying? And are you really gaining extra returns? So sometimes just having a simple all-world tracker, for example, or simply having the S&P 500, or keep having one set of bonds, one set of income funds, rather than having so many different things. Another life lesson. So envy is a really stupid sin because it's the only one you can never possibly have any fun at. Now, this is a difficult one because obviously everyone, certainly in life, your kind of human nature is to try and one up the person to your left and one up the person to your right. And naturally, people are jealous of other people or their situation. And it leads to bad mindsets and bad behaviors. That person's got a new car or that person's got a bigger house. And it's really hard to get away from. And I think the ones that are really content with their life, content with their situation, tend to enjoy it a lot more because they're not stressed about trying to compete with the person on their left or the person on their right. But this is one that I think is really hard to achieve, especially when you're surrounded by it daily. There's advertising, there's loads of social media now that emphasizes it. But what you find, even with the social media influencers, a lot of the time they're in debt or to fund that lifestyle, they're having to borrow lots of money. If we now look at another investing quote, "The desire to get rich fast is pretty dangerous." And we've seen this happen a lot, right? People look for that get rich quick scheme. And I don't think it's just in investing, it's just generally in life, right? People will always think that the path to wealth is quick. And sometimes it's possible. You hit on a great idea at the right time and it takes off, but they are so far and few between. And actually the slow and steady path, the tortoise, the hare type analogy, the tortoise really does win the race in this particular examples of investing over the long term. Another life quote, "There's no better teacher than history in determining the future." Now, this is an interesting one because we always talk about past performance isn't representative of future performance. But I also did a video back a while ago that looks at the reason why we do back testing, right? Why these fund managers do those back tests. And the core summary of it is that basically, although it doesn't predict the future, it's at least a way forward in trying to understand how markets have behaved. And it's like navigating the seas without any compass. At least they've got some idea of the direction of future. So again, it's no crystal ball, but it's a guide. And so I think this is something that Charlie Warren did very well during their careers. They did look at the history, but they also understood the present and combined the two together to really get a good, solid understanding of life and investing. Another investing quote: mimicking the herd invites regression to mean. And in simple terms, it's hype investing or following all the hot trends. And, typically that leads to overvaluations in the market. And no one can predict whether those valuations will come true. You're always buying forward value typically. And the markets are very good at pricing in what's about to happen before it almost happens. And so there's always this danger that if you follow the herd, you miss the kind of the gems that are hidden behind, and understanding the true value of something disappears. For me personally, it also makes it really hard to understand why I brought it into my portfolio. Did I bring it in because I genuinely believe in it, or did I buy it because of the hype? So again, I think this is another really important quote. Another life quote is: the first rule of a happy life is low expectations. And I think this is really key. I think a lot of the time we have a lot of high expectations from everything we do in life. And sometimes keeping it simple and not expecting things in life or from others means that we don't get disappointed and we don't get worried about the next thing that's going to happen. And I really like this. I really love to base my life around this, where my expectations are low in terms of where I want to head. And if I overachieve, great. If I underachieve, it doesn't affect me so much. And it's just that balance of happiness versus expectation. Another investing quote: a very good company that you can buy at a fair price is a better deal than an average company that you can buy at a very good price. I think this one sounds great in principle. Obviously, it's very hard for retail investors. We don't have access to the information that Charlie and Warren have in terms of a very good company, right? The definition of a very good company. And again, at a fair price, what does that really mean? There are metrics like P/E ratios and other metrics that we could use, and they are available to retail investors. But a lot of the detail and the research analysts that they have access to doesn't compare to what we do. So sometimes I believe that this is a true statement, but the reality for the average investor is it's hard for us to achieve this. But I do know that Charlie instilled a lot of this principle in Warren. Warren sometimes picked up what he would call the cigar butt off the floor that kind of had one last puff, where, the amount of assets it had, it was, let's say, a dying company, its assets, if you stripped all the assets out, it would outweigh its debts and you'd get something back. He would call that the last puff from that cigarette. But Charlie took a different view of this, more of a long-term view, which is look for good companies that are depressed. For whatever reason, they are still good value companies at a fair price, rather than average companies that he could buy at a good price. This was a shift in mindset when Charlie supported Warren in Berkshire Hathaway. Another thing from a life perspective is invert, always invert. Turn a situation or problem upside down, look at it backwards. This one's a difficult one, again, from a life perspective, because you've got to have the ability to do this. And I think this is a skill that's not easily achieved. I've certainly tried to look at situations when I've been in problems or looked at bad situations and tried to weigh them up. But I think there's not always a good way of doing this. And this is just matures over life and the support that you have within your life, your family, your friends. And I've learned a lot from doing this channel. Support from various members in the Discord. So shout out to all the people that have helped me in the Discord. There was things like I was reluctant to do it because I felt like it was just another challenge. But actually I've learned that with the support of the community, it's actually helped me grow and understand that side of things, learn new things. And then finally, another investing quote to finish on: all intelligent investors is value investing, acquiring more than you are paying for. And this is just humbly how Charlie and Warren looked at things, right? They were intelligently investing in value investing, and acquiring more than they were paying for. And that's why the stock has done so well. That's why all their investments and returns have been so good. They took this very clear path around value investing. That doesn't mean it's the best path for everybody. Obviously, their situation was their situation and they chose that path and they were comfortable with that path. There are other people that are trying to achieve FIRE meaning financial independence, retire early. And again, I've done a video on FIRE if you want to go and have a look at that. But ultimately, again, they were trying to achieve a certain view on investing. I've done a video again on different styles of investing, whether an income investor, dividend growth investor. But the aim is still to try and increase the amount of money that you have and your wealth over time. So there you go, guys. Again, nothing was financial advice. It was all for education purposes only, as always. But let me know in the comments, by the way, whether any of these points, any of these 17 points resonated with you. Do you have other views that maybe sit outside of this? I'll be curious to know what other people's thoughts are on this. Okay, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.